In this video, which is part one of a two-part series, we're going to tackle a true tinker and timber project. About 10 years ago, in 2015, I built this gadget. It was a gizmo to sit on a desk. You might call it an art piece, but it was really a first attempt at combining my new hobby of woodworking with a long-standing hobby that I had of an interest in electronics. And what it does is it's a binary display. It can show various different patterns all in binary, like for example, it is counting now, and you can adjust the speed up and down. And I thought it would be interesting to recreate this and do something new and interesting on the concept. When I built this, I was new to woodworking, and I used the most exotic wood that I could find at my local Home Depot. And this is built out of only the finest big box poplar. But I thought, if we're going to do something new, we should level our game up a little bit. And so we are going to build this. This is going to be a clock shown in binary, and this is built out of cherry and padauk and walnut, the YouTube woodworkers trifecta of woods. We've upped our game both with the electronics as well as the woodworking. So this video, part one, is going to be about how we make this wooden piece that houses the future electronics. And in part two, we'll talk about the electronics, the circuit, and the computer code that makes all of this work, and we'll turn this into a binary clock. I have my template, so I know about how big I need to make the panel that's going to hold the LEDs. And I have here an assortment of wood that I'm hoping I can resaw, because this is a little over an inch thick, and I only want my panel a ½ inch thick. I have some walnut, I have some maple, I have some what I believe is padauk and cherry strips, and I have some purple hearts. Domestic, reasonably affordable, and they all look pretty good together. So the first thing I want to do is figure out just kind of what I want my panel to look like. And again, I only need this to be 8 or 9 inches wide in its rough dimension. So right now the trick is, let's figure out what we like and what looks good. And it's really hard to stay away from like a cherry, padauk, walnut. So yeah, let's figure this out and come up with what our panel is going to look like.
One eternity later.
Cut finish is okay. Running it through the planer will certainly take care of any of that blade chatter. I am a little thinner than I wanted, but I'm still probably thicker than 3/8 here, which is fine. I can take it down and make 3/8 inch thick my final thickness. That'll work absolutely no problem, because ultimately these are going to have holes drilled in them that I put in mounting hardware for the LEDs. And most mounting hardware is not designed to go through really thick panels. So we need to get these nice and thin without being too thin. And that should still be plenty good and sturdy. So not too bad for a resaw on a bandsaw that is not set up for it and didn't have the right blade on it. All right, here's where we do the obligatory YouTube voiceover. We're just going to run these panels through the planer to get them nice and flat, make sure they're both the same thickness. And I ended up taking them to just under a ½ inch and getting them both the same so they can be glued together into a panel. I've got a lot of light sapwood here in my walnut, so I think I'm going to use a piece of padauk, set my template so that I have my LEDs at the top and I have time setting buttons at the bottom. And I am going to use that padauk as a divider this way to separate the LED lights at the top, which tell the time, from the time setting buttons at the bottom. I think that's my plan. And I think that padauk being a little bit darker and with the kind of oranges and reds will give it a real nice pop in the middle of that sapwood, which is kind of light. And then I have the slightly darker walnut at the top. And I think that'll come out really nice in the finish. I'm going to get this panel into glue up. I've got my Harbor Freight clamps, and I've got some Titebond 3. Probably overkill in this application. So let's get some glue on this joint and get it clamped up. And we will do this piece, and then we'll clamp our padauk in the middle between them. This joint should be plenty strong, but we're really not asking very much of this joint. Make sure we get everything down as flat as we can. And get some good squeeze out along that joint. All right, we just need to let that dry. I was thinking about making the base out of walnut as well. The only piece that I really have in the workshop right now, it's pretty thick, but it's not very wide. I found a piece of cherry that is a nice wide board, and I think I can double up on it because it is only a 3/4 inch thick plank. So I'm gonna try cutting this down. We'll stack this up for our glue up and see if that looks like we want it to look proportionally. I'm gonna use my miter saw, and I'm gonna cut this board about 14 inches wide. It's gonna give me plenty of room to decide exactly how I wanna lay out the panel that's gonna go on top. And I'm gonna cut 3 pieces and stack it up. I will thin this down a little bit, but the ultimate goal is to end up with a piece that's almost 2 inches thick when I'm finished with the glue up. Then I'm just going to run the panels through the joiner to get a true face before I run them through the planer to bring them down to final dimension before gluing them together. Then I convert the joiner back into planer mode again, and I run all 3 boards through to make sure that my top face and my bottom face are nice and square, ready to be glued together into our clock's base. Now we're going to do the glue up for the base. This is purely aesthetic, so I'm just clamping it to make sure that I get reasonable adhesion around the edges. I'm not as concerned if the middle isn't glued super tight. This will get cut down, but it's not going to be structural, it's not going to be load bearing. It's going to sit on a desk and it's going to hold up a panel on top of it. So I'm not going to be super fussed if this isn't the world's best glue up. I'm just going to organize the boards. I'm going to try and get the knots hidden in the middle so that I don't have to worry about filling them in. We're just going to use some tongue depressors to spread the glue around. And if you don't have tongue depressors, I highly recommend them. They're absolutely great for spreading glue, like mixing stains, things like that. Absolutely invaluable to have in the shop. So we're just going to get some glue spread around, nice even coating on all of the layers, get them all laid together, and then we're going to bring out the clamps. And this is going to be probably a little trickier than it looks. Yep, definitely trickier than it looks. Get all of the clamps on. You can never have too many clamps. If my lovely wife ever watches this video and is looking for a good gift idea, I mean, clamps are always something I could use, and could definitely use some more of these short Harbor Freight F-style clamps. Then we're going to add a few more, and if a couple of clamps is good, even more clamps is better. Get it all tightened up. Add 1 or 2 more here. And I think we're ready to let this dry. All right, it's been a few hours. Let's get these pieces out of the clamps and start getting them cleaned up. We're gonna take the panel out first. And check it, and it looks nice and reasonably flat. There's a little bit of a rock in it, but again, we're gonna have this sitting at a bit of an angle like this in the stand, so I don't think you'll ever notice. And there we go. We've got the base out of the clamps as well, ready to get cleaned up for both of these parts. After converting the planer back into a joiner yet again, I'm squaring up one of the edges of the base before turning it onto its face and getting a nice flat reference, so I have a good 90-degree angle. And then I'll run the opposite face through the planer. Then I'm also flattening the backside of our panel that's eventually going to hold our LEDs, so that we can get it ready to knock that little strip of Paduke down so we can get a nice flat panel ready for final assembly of all of our parts. I really should have a plane for this. I don't have a plane at the moment. And I should probably have a sharper chisel. And for all of you hand tool woodworkers out there, I apologize in advance. Getting decent with hand tools is on my long-term list. As you can tell, I am not there yet. I'm not even in the right neighborhood. Heck, I'm probably not even in the right zip code. Really don't want to slip and have to go get 20 stitches. And then we'll just take a couple of real thin little passes with the planer. And we should be in business. All right. And yes, I know, I don't have a real set of chisels. It's on my list. Converting the joiner back into a planer, I think about for the last time in this project. I'm just taking a couple of light passes on this panel. It actually ended up getting a little thinner than I wanted it to get. A little bit less than a ½ inch, maybe 5/16. It's still plenty thick to hold up our LEDs, but a little thinner than I had initially planned. It's okay though, it actually means that the components that have to go through and get secured fit a little bit better. I needed to make a bevel cut on my block, and unfortunately with the crosscut table, I have to bevel cut to the left of the blade on the other table saw, so I can't slide the guard all the way over, or the fence. So this is where having more than one table saw comes in handy, because I can slide this one all the way over. It's just now that I have this one set up for a dado, I've got to take everything out and put a regular saw blade into it. I'm always paranoid it's gonna go off in my hands, you know, and like break my thumb off. And that would be the irony of having a saw stop. I lose my thumb because the blade explodes or the brake explodes in my hands. Highly unlikely, but you never know. There we go. All right, we are going to make a bevel cut of about 8 degrees. 82 minus 90 is 8 degrees. I want the face of the clock to lean back, and that seems like a decent amount for it to lean back. You'll be able to see it. It's not straight up and down. I like 8 degrees. So now we just need to decide which face we're going to cut. I think this is our candidate. Line everything up. And this is where I've got to fix my outfeed table, because I actually jammed it into the outfeed table because it's slightly higher on this part of the saw. So fortunately I was able to make my cut. A little sketchy. Got to get that fixed. That is definitely on the project board. But we have our angle. I think that's going to look nice. We'll probably put a chamfer. And then we'll set this at 10 degrees to complement. Now we need to decide where we're going to cut our panel. So I'm using my template and I'm kind of figuring out where I'm going to split where the LEDs are and where the buttons go with this strip of Padook. That's going to cut my panel there, and that's going to leave me a panel that's 6 1/4, just a hair over 6 1/4. So I think that'll work. I think that's a reasonably good height. That also gives me a little bit of meat here if I decide I want to shorten this up just a little bit. So I think that's where I want to make my cut. And I want it to lean back. So I want it to bevel that way, 8 degrees. And I need to put a piece of backing material and glue it on there. So when I make that cut, I actually have something to fasten down to my base. I'll get this glued up and I'll show you what I mean. It'll make sense in a minute. But I think I've got my panel marked. I took a little piece of maple. See, I told you I would work in all of the YouTube woodworker woods, and I'm going to use this as the piece that glues to the back of the panel so that when it gets cut off at that 8-degree angle, I have something that I can attach down to the base and will hold the panel in place on the base. And I'm just going to take this over to the bandsaw and knock some of the material out so that it's just not as chunky and looks a little bit more stylized. This is not perfect, but it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect because it won't really be seen, and we'll sand on it a little bit and get rid of some of the worst of the teeth marks. For now, we're just getting the meat removed from this piece. So I made this template, and I'll put a picture of it up on the screen, with the thought process that I can lay it on my panel exactly where I want. And in theory, these holes are actual size for both the LEDs and for the buttons. So I'm going to cut this out, figure out where I want the placement of everything on my panel. I do have all of this linked in the description if you want to play along at home and build your own clock. I've got templates you can download, I've got schematics, I've got links to all of the parts, so you too can build your own packed BCD binary clock. Sounds far nerdier than it really is. All right, if this is the front and this is the top, then I want this somewhere like so. And I want the buttons to be below this strip of Padook. We're pretty close. I guess the whole thing could go this way just a tiny bit. So if I nudge it that way. Okay, I'm still a little bit to the right. Go ahead and nudge it just to the left a little bit. So I'm just covering the edge of my circle on the left. And I'm just covering the edge of the circle on my right. And I know that these centers are spaced the same and the clusters are the same from each other. So that should be good enough for what I need. And then I am going to use my spring-loaded center punch. And we're going to punch some holes. Make sure nothing has moved. So I'm just covering the circle there. Just covering the circle there. So I think I'm good left to right. Find the center where I have put a convenient cross mark for each of these holes. And we're going to punch. And this is going to tell me right where I need to drill. There. We have them all center punched. Now we get to go drill them. I decided to chuck up a 1/2-inch drill bit and see if I could fit my LED holders and my switches through a 1/2-inch hole, or if I really needed the 17 32nds and 15 32nds drill bits. All right, let's see how well our part fits. So it is just a little plastic, and of course I picked the nastiest one. It's just a little plastic piece that has threads on it and some nylon nuts, and ooh, it's tight. So maybe I do need a 17 32nds drill. I don't have one because that thing is a little bit bigger than a 1/2-inch. All right, this is why we test things. How does our button do in a 1/2-inch hole? The button's probably going to be perfect. So the button will be great. And I even have enough room to get my threads at the back. So a 1/2-inch is going to be perfect for the button. It is not big enough for the LED holder. Son of a diddly. Through the miracle of waiting just a little bit, I now have my 17 32nds drill bit. We're going to try test drilling another hole to see if that is going to let our little LED bulb holder fit inside of our plank. And if that doesn't work, then we're going to have to get creative. But considering that 1/2-inch LED bulb holder I could screw into the 1/2-inch hole, I think that being just that much above, that 32nd of an inch above, should give me the clearance that I can make this work. So let's drill a test hole. All right, so let's see how it's gonna fit. This is the 1/2 inch hole yesterday, and we can see that will thread in, but it's too tight. This is our 17/32 inch hole, and it goes in just perfect. And I even have the ability to get on the threads on the back of it. So I think that that 17/32 is gonna work, and we know our 1/2 inch hole works for the button. So we should be in good shape. Now we just get to bust through these rapid fire. A quick 20 holes later, technically 22 for the buttons, we have our front panel drilled, and now we can attach our support, glue that on, so when we cut this, it'll have a place to affix as it leans back and sits on our base. And we'll cut it at that same 8-degree angle. And I didn't touch the table saw, so in case it's not exactly 8 degrees, we're not trying to get it reset, so it should be exactly the same. I realize this is face grain to face grain, and it is certainly not gonna be overly strong, but it just has to hold up this panel. I think it's gonna be absolutely fine for that. So then we get that line back up with our line. Make sure that it looks good left to right. And then we'll throw some clamps on it. And we'll probably need to use the drinking straw trick to get the glue squeeze out. I'm not worried about the bottom because it is going to get cut off, but I would like the glue squeeze out on the top to be less. So let's grab a drinking straw. And I am sure you've seen the drinking straw trick, but on the off chance you haven't, you get a drinking straw, you cut the tip at a little bit of an angle, and then you can get into that corner and you can get the glue mostly pulled up. And that gets rid of almost all of the glue squeeze out. All right, now we just let this dry. This is the reason for the order of operations. Now that I have this support piece glued on, I can run it through and make the cut, and I have not touched this blade, so it's still leaning back. I have it set to 8 degrees, but if it's not exactly 8 degrees, since I haven't touched it, it'll match the angle that we cut on the front of the base, and everything should look nice together. Now we can see the reason for that cut as we turn everything sideways. This angle follows up nicely with this angle. And with this block, I have a place that I can put a couple of holes and I can run a couple screws to hold it to the base. So that'll be how I connect everything together. After a little trial and error, I figured out how big the base needs to be. I want it to be about 6.5 inches from the front to the back. About 55 millimeters. I want it to be 10.5 inches wide from side to side, about 66 millimeters. And then the platen that will hold the LEDs sits back from the front about 40 millimeters or 1.5 inches. So the next thing to do is to get this cut down to size. And this is kind of what we're going for. With the base cut down to final size, there's plenty of room back here for the electronics and to connect to the LEDs. I've got a nice substantial base. I've got the top that holds the LEDs, and everything lines up in a nice plane. I even like the contrast of the cherry with the lighter sapwood that is separated by the padauk up into the darker walnut. And I think once some stain is on this, it'll look really nice. To connect the top to the base, I'm going to drill a 3/8 inch hole with a Forstner bit and then come through with a 5/16 pilot so that my screw can sit in there. And then I will use a smaller pilot bit in the base and then make a registration mark. This will just simply screw to the base. We'll get it all together and you'll see. We figure out where we want this to be aligned. And I had wanted it to sit back 1.5 inches from the front. And then we are real close on either side. So we'll get a smaller drill bit and we'll get ourselves a couple of registration marks so we can come back and we can drill the pilot hole in the base. I have gone and gotten a 1/8" brad point drill bit, and we are going to line him up in the hole. Just give it a little tap. That one's good. Now we're gonna realign the front. That looks good. Give it a little tap. And now we've got our marks, which I will use my center punch on. And now we'll just drill that hole. And I want to match the angle as much as I can. Now we have our pilot holes in the base, and our top will line up and it'll screw right in. And that's how we're gonna affix it. It's time for some sanding, and I'm not gonna bore you with any details. It is strictly straight sanding. I'm using the 3M Cubitron sanding pads. I'm using 120, 180, 220, and 320 grits. I'm moving through the grits. I'm marking all of my faces to make sure I sand completely down with each grit before moving to the next finer grit. And we're just gonna go through quick time lapse and get all of the sanding done. To finish the wood on this project, I'm gonna use Odie's oil for a couple of reasons. One, it's what I have on hand, and two, I do like the finish and the way it leaves the wood looking and feeling after it's been applied and is fully cured. Now, I know Odie's has some controversial opinions in the woodworker community, but this is what we're gonna use for this project. We're going to get in the Odie's oil, mix it up a little bit, and start getting it on the front panel. Really kind of dab it around before adding a little bit to a clean white Scotch-Brite pad that really works it down into the wood fibers. It's very, very mildly abrasive, and that really pushes the oil down into the wood. The instructions recommend putting it on extremely sparingly. I think it calls out to put on as little of the product as you can get away with and really work down into the wood. And I've always found that I need more of the oil, so I tend to put it on a little heavier than they recommend. When I feel like things are getting a little dry, I'll add a little bit more of the oil to my Scotch-Brite pad and then continue really working it in. Odie's recommends letting it sit on the wood for at least a half an hour, all the way up to several hours. I've really never found there's a huge difference between letting it set for half an hour to an hour or letting it sit for multiple hours. So I like to leave it on the wood for maybe 45 minutes to an hour, hour and a half before I come back and buff off any of the oil that hasn't absorbed into the wood. And that's what we're going to do for this project. We'll just work our way all around, getting a nice coating on all of the surfaces. We'll work the oil all over, all around the back, get a nice amount on the back before really getting it worked down into the wood grain. And now we'll go ahead and get some of the wood dabbed onto the cherry. And it's not as much of a transformation from the walnut to the cherry, but you can see as the oil goes on, it really starts to sort of warm up and give a richness to the cherry that's really nice. And the cherry, over time, as it ages, it'll darken a little bit with exposure to light, and it just takes on a really beautiful glow with the Odie's. And when you touch the wood, you get a really nice feel. It's not like you're touching a film finish. I'm a big fan. We'll just get it worked all over the edges, the front, the side, and you can really tell on the side as that wood soaks into the end grain and really darkens it up, which I think looks particularly nice. So now that we've got our base and our front panel that holds the LEDs completely worked in with the oil, we're going to set it aside for the requisite amount of time, probably 45 minutes, maybe an hour, and then we'll come back and we'll buff off any oil that's still on the surface, and that'll be the finish for this project. The requisite amount of time has passed, and it is time to buff any remaining Odie's oil off of the surface of these parts. And to do that, I know Odie's oil recommends using a clean cotton rag, but I have found these very thin, almost disposable microfiber towels I got at Walmart in the cleaning department work really well. They're a little bit of a pile on one side and kind of flat on the other, and they do a great job at pulling any excess oil off, and they're inexpensive enough that I don't feel too bad about only getting 1 or 2 uses out of them. So this is what I'm going to use to get these parts cleaned up. So we're going to start with the base here. We're just going to buff any oil that is left on the surfaces off, and ideally it's all soaked in, and this shouldn't really pull too much up. According to the instructions, you cannot take too much product off. You want to get as much lifted as possible. And I don't know if you can see, but it is picking up a little bit. There's just a little bit of discoloration on my microfiber towel here. I just love the cherry on that end grain, how it really darkens up. It really looks nice. All right, there we go. And on the base, we have got that wiped down. And I do have gloves on, so I'm not feeling it, but this is just super smooth to the touch. It has a really nice hand feel, and I think that this will age beautifully. So then let's get the front. We'll start with the back actually. Get it all buffed out. There's definitely a little bit more oil on this piece, especially here on the back. Get a little clean spot on our rag here, and then we'll get this piece to sort of help prop up the front. I just need to be a little bit more ginger on this front piece so I don't accidentally break anything, because it is a pretty thin piece of wood. Again, more than sturdy enough to hold the LEDs. Yeah, I think that looks really nice. We'll get the two pieces and put them together to see what the finished wood looks like. And then we will get the electronics finished, put it all together, and then I think this project is done. All right, now I don't have these two pieces fastened together yet, but this is what it looks like. And I think that looks great. Now, once the cherry darkens up a little bit with age, I think it's really gonna come together and look superb. But as it is, I am quite happy with the way this turned out. Real quick, before we wrap this video up and get to the next video, I have a question. I have just enough of these 10mm LEDs to do the entire clock in a single color. So I could do all red, I could do all green, or I could do all yellow. And originally my idea was to keep it monochromatic. But as I put this sort of stoplight color scheme in here, I kind of like the look of it the way it is. So my question is, and put a comment down below, should I do it all the same color? Should I do the seconds a different color and do hours and minutes the same? What do you think I should do? Because I'm kind of digging this multicolor approach, and I really don't want to solder it and then have to unsolder it to change it if I hate it. So would love to know what you think. Now that we've completed the case for our clock, that brings us to the end of part 1. In part 2, we're going to do a deep dive on the electronics. We're going to look at the schematic. We're going to get it all assembled, tested, and working. If you've enjoyed these kind of nerdy woodworker type projects, I would invite you to give this video a like, and if you have enjoyed what you see around here, possibly even to subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you've learned something.